Hello everyone. Welcome back. My name is Antonio Alanis, and I want to talk about something that I've not talked about as much as I want to. I want to talk more about the consulting side of what I do. If you are familiar with the information that I share online, you are more than likely aware that about 98% of the information that I share online is primarily related to art, specifically the visual arts, and focusing on paintings, illustrations, public art, workshops, my store, my book. But one thing I don't really share as much as I want to is the consulting side of the services that I have been working on and have offered for multiple people throughout the past, I want to say, 6 to 8 years now. And I want to use this episode to talk about those services to go more into depth to give you all a more comprehensive understanding of the information that you can learn about the services that I offer in case you are interested. And want to give you a run through of some things that I have done in the past, a few, possibly highlight a few projects that I've shared and share things that I have learned and just talk about that, just in general. And so, why have I decided to share this right now? I was thinking the other day that about 98 or 100% of the information that I share online is often focused on art. But one thing that I don't really share as much is that other than the art that I'm doing, there's another component of the work that I do that entails working with multiple organizations, foundations, and consulting services that I offer that oftentimes are happening at the same time when I'm painting or I am making a mural or leading a workshop. And oftentimes those same things do interact or sometimes overlap, and sometimes they're happening at the same time. And I want to share more about that. So, one is grant writing. The first one is grant writing and development. So, one thing that I normally have not shared is that, or it is public knowledge, but I did start working in the nonprofit field in about 2016. And a large part of my nonprofit experience was not only directing programming, but part of that was fundraising. So not only was I implementing and executing programming, I was also looking for how do I make my programs or the programs that I ran back then sustainable? How can I lead them and how can I create essentially income streams so that these programs run and continue to exist? And one thing that I really discovered back then that has carried me over and I continue to use to this very same day is grant writing. And grant writing is really a large fundraising umbrella within the development fundraising umbrella as well. So it's like a subset of fundraising and development. And I really have enjoyed working in multiple settings around education. Some of you may or may not know I am an educator. I taught in the public school system and then moved on to the nonprofit world. And I was able to work to evaluate learning, to evaluate what students could do, and work with students from preschool to essentially adults who are learning how to read or write in Spanish. So within that range, I bring a lot of experience with understanding what it is that people need to, one, be ready for the next stage of their lives. And that's one thing. I later moved on and branched out to other grant writing fields, including mental health meaning health and well-being. So I bring a lot of experience and working with organizations who are looking to fundraise for their programming that entails connecting people to either therapist, psychiatrist, ensuring that they have access to these opportunities that more than likely they don't have because either of language barriers or sometimes the marginalization and the essentially not including people in these larger conversations and what their impact is and not having access to these resources. So mental health is a huge one, and over the years, it really branched out into more health-related aspects, including food security, including making sure that people have access to food, that people have access to nutritious food, and I have branched out into other forms of health, including just general preventative care, not for diagnosing or treatment, because many other organizations don't do that, but many of the information that I have been able to do is how do we make sure that people have access again to healthcare resources like education, and when applicable to resources where people can, be connected to larger institutions that they can diagnose and treat them. So one thing I want to say now is that it's really exciting, and you may have already noticed some of the crossovers that I am talking about right now with the work that I do as an artist. As an artist, I primarily do work around how do we use the art as improving our well-being generally? How do we talk about anxiety? How do we talk about depression? How do we talk about not having access to these resources? And my work has really been developing into this intersection of art, well-being, mental health, and expression, especially creative expression, not to diagnose or to treat anyone, but to learn about common roadblocks that may prevent people from speaking out or voicing, verbalizing certain problems that may prevent them from speaking, or talking about taboo items in our communities. And I really don't see them as separate. They may look as separate in the way that I present them, because when I work with clients, I show it that they're separate. When applicable, I bring in the art. But one of the biggest things that I've noticed with my work, and I know I was not supposed to talk about art, but I really can't pull them away being a grant writer and an artist because they are so integral to my practice. And I'm very happy that I've been able to work with multiple clients around mental health workshops, which is maybe why you have noticed a lot of that work in my communication. I do a lot of work around how do we talk about our identities? How do we celebrate our cultures? How do we talk about the future that we envision? How do we think about the things that we know can be possible? And those are beautiful things that art can do for us. They can allow us to dream. It can allow us to think about removing barriers, roadblocks, and obstacles that may prevent us from seeing a very just, equitable future that I imagine, that many of us in my circle imagine for not only ourselves, but the people that we work with. And I wanted to say that my work is really morphed into health in many aspects and many opportunities. I'm very grateful. So that's another aspect of my work, health. Another aspect as a grant writer that I have worked with, and I'll talk more about this, I have worked on economic mobility. So anything around making sure that people have opportunities for improving their quality of life through either understanding how to think about and monetizing a skill that they may have and bringing in a business. Maybe not a full LLC, but a business that can allow them to bring in a little more income. And there's research to say that the more money people have, the more opportunities they can also have for their health and how they live, and what resources they have, the food, the type of food, the type of experiences they have. And again, my work, although it is about art and it has grant writing and development and fundraising, is very integrated in very much a way that allows me to see this in a interconnected web. That I'll be happy to talk more about that in this episode or upcoming episodes. But that's one of the biggest things that I wanted to say, that economic mobility is a huge one. As a business owner myself, as a consultant, I really value making sure that our communities have opportunities so that they can have a higher quality of life, such as, starting their own business, or maybe not a business that is fully registered, but at least becoming, sole proprietors, or becoming aware about the opportunities that they have. And I've worked with multiple organizations who want to have that kind of information. So again, I'm bringing in my experience as a business owner, as someone who grew up as a first generation Latino here in the South in the United States, and bringing a lot of that experience into my life as a worker, as a consultant. And it's just amazing to see the connections that we are able to fundraise for, and that people have opportunities for them to start from the very beginning, because this could be its own episode or a series about how do we live as consultants or as business owners or as artists, again going back and tying back to the art. And it's a lot of information, but sometimes that's very I don't want to say ambitious, but one thing I've found is that sometimes we have to take it a step back, or take it a step that is a beginning step, and start from the very fundamentals of what it is to manage money, such as budgeting, including how do we, reconcile the cost? How do we look at our statements, bank statements? How do we understand our profit and loss? So the very fundamental aspects of that, and then moving on to, okay, now how do we do marketing? How do we do communication? How do we do and improve the way that people know about the work that we do? And again, I'm tying this back to other services that I also offer that I can also share with you all. In fact, if you're interested in learning more about other things that I do offer that I don't get to share as much on social media, you can go onto my website and you can see other parts of consulting components that I do, including communication strategy, speaking engagements, art and culture consulting, in addition to the grant writing and fundraising. Okay, so far we talked about a few ways that I am able to contribute, including health, mental health, general health, economic mobility, art consulting, and there's just so much, as well as education. There are so many opportunities that we can go into. And one of the biggest things that I really have enjoyed is working with organizations that are intersectional. Organizations that are working with partners that are strategic about how they are using resources. And not only that, but also how do they fundraise for independent, non-restrictive funding? And how can we help, organizations become more sustainable? So this brings me to another tangent that I will not explore today right now. In fundraising, so not only do I do grant writing, I also work with organizations to diversify income streams and make sure that they can have multiple money coming into their organizations, including donor relationships, building the infrastructure for them to receive donations, event planning, fundraisers, those kinds of events. And I really have enjoyed working with them the past few years. And I just want to say that this world of grant writing is so extensive. It's so full of so many opportunities that I've just been very grateful, and have not been able to share as much because most, if not all, of this information has been very private. So I cannot really share with people. I work with XYZ client or clients, and we did XYZ for them because, again, it's protected information, and I cannot share that private information with anyone because it's, again, internal information that I've been entrusted to keep and not to share. In fact, many of the contracts that I do, or all the contracts that I fill out and I sign and other people sign, including clients, there's a large portion of it that confidentiality is key. So I cannot, again, go on and say, I worked with this client and we did this and that. So I have to be very careful. You may be wondering, why do I not share about these opportunities, or why do I not talk about them as openly as the art? The art is more of a public-facing, still private work that I create for myself and for my community as well, but primarily is for my self-expression. But the grant writing in itself is something that it's particularly tied to people's internal work and processes that they have. So I'm going to share my website again, is antoniolanisart.com, and you can see that I have a section here that can highlight the types of consulting services that I offer. And the first one is grant writing and fundraising. Now, I'm recording this in June of 2026, so if you're listening to this in a later time or episode, you may notice that the website probably changed, or I moved things around, and that is expected. So definitely, if you are listening in June or at least in 2026, you can expect to see the following descriptions of the consulting that I offer. So you can look more into depth in terms of what I offer, but one of the biggest things that I do create for consulting is the grant writing and fundraising strategy. So these services include and are broad, and I can tell you more of them right now. So if you ever wondered what kind of things does Antonio Alanis Art do, I'll tell you. The first one will be grant research. So I help organizations find essentially funders, grant opportunities that they are eligible for based on the organizations that they have and that they are, including the participants that they serve. So I work with them finding, grants that are coming up based on information that I've seen and have researched. The second one is grant writing and editing. So grant writing is essentially writing from beginning to the end, and that includes drafting, revising, presenting, integrating revisions, and then submitting to the platform so that clients can receive that information and we send it to the funders. So I do that, grant writing and editing. Other than that, I also have offered consulting in terms of looking at people's grants, and I offer them a few pointers based on information that I have learned over the years of what kind of grants can have a strong chance of winning. And I give them the opportunity to look at the grants as well. So not only do I write the grants myself, but I can also look at other people's grant drafts and offer them feedback on the information that I have been able to acquire and to learn from as well. So I do that from beginning to the end. So that means that I become a grant writing program manager, not in the sense of managing all the programs, but just the grant assignment that I've been entrusted with. So that is making sure that we have all the elements together, making sure that we have all the things that we need to have to send. So another thing that I do offer is program design. So program design is essentially helping organizations be more clear about what kinds of programming they want to fund. Sometimes what I've found out that sometimes clients may struggle with writing because, one, they have not really thought about the program design in depth as much. And so we work on that on preliminary stages. We work on that first and then move on to making sure that we can, again, write the grant or write a grant that can align with a funder and have stronger chances of winning, because that's what I'm here for, to increase people's chances, not to guarantee ever, because again, no grant is ever guaranteed to be received or for people to win, but I can provide people the opportunity to learn and strengthen the grants that they are writing. So again, program design is important. Sometimes there are flaws or there are gaps or there are holes within these programming ideas that we make sure that, okay, are we really learning? Are we really making sure that people are, having strong evaluation so that we can know that the grant program or the program itself is providing results? Are we seeing a change? Are we seeing that people know this or not? And again, I could go more into depth about what this means in program design, but I did want to offer that this is something that I do. I don't do it all the time, but I do offer that. And oftentimes, the grant writing is program design. Sometimes clients come with me or to me and say, Antonio, I need ideas on how to implement this, and I don't have it already established. How can we make it so that we can start making this possible? Sometimes people have reached out and say, hey, I want to do this new initiative. How can I do this? And if I don't know how to do it, what are the tools that we will need to make sure that this, program is successful? So we break it down into how are we going to know that this program will be successful. Another component that I do offer is logic models. So anything around, again, what are the things that we need? What are the inputs, outputs, outcomes, vision and change, and theory of change? And how do we know that we are being successful? How are we evaluating that the programming that we are in fact implementing is giving a result? And again, I can talk more about logic models in person or with people who reach out to me and want to book me. But I provide a visual way of making sure that people know, okay, these are the things that I need, and this is how I know I will be successful. I also work with evaluation planning, as I said earlier. How do we know that we are successful? How do we know that we are being intentional? And how do we know that what we are creating is actually working? How do we know that a program that we are implementing is having a change, or the change that we said we wanted for them to experience? I know I'm being very vague right now, and again, I can't really go into details, but I'm hoping that this general information can be at least a taste of the information that I can work with clients. And that's the biggest thing that I really found out. Again, confidentiality. I cannot start pointing out a certain program that I worked with in the past. So one thing that I have been working, but I don't do as much, is grant reporting. I primarily focus on the initial grant writing and submission, but I also have experience with grant reporting. So let's say we win the grant and a few months or a year has passed. What do we do when we report to the funder of what we learned or what we were able to do with our funding and money? And that is something that I do and have been doing, is how do we summarize? How do we evaluate? How do we look for trends? How do we report? What are the qualitative, quantitative data points that we can analyze and report as well for funders? And how do we present that as well? I also have been working on this other one more in my consulting, is introducing organizations, primarily organizations who are starting out, to how do they or can they reach out to funders or foundation outreach. Many of the organizations that I worked with in the past have been beginning organizations, so think about organizations that have a few years with this programming, maybe 5 years or less. I work with other organizations that have been more mature, like 10, 15 years. And sometimes it's great to, revisit how do we reach out to fundraising funders, foundations, excuse me, so that they can, get to know us. And we know that it's important to start a relationship. I won't go into details why this is important. I can maybe go into details in the future. But I have been introducing a few clients to a few foundation contacts that I have. And again, it's one of the most important, if not the biggest step in making sure that people are in the funder's radar. And again, general fundraising strategy. I know I talked a little bit about this earlier, but not only do I work with clients to write a grant primarily, which is, I think, 95% of the services that I offer. I have been working more lately, the past few years, past 2-3 years, in fundraising strategy. So the general fundraising strategy that includes not only grant writing, but also including non-restrictive funding. So how do we, reach out to donors? How do we steward donors' relationships? How do we make sure that people know about us? And fundraising, including communication and marketing. So that's a lot of the information that I offer with grant writing and funding strategy. I'm going to go a little bit faster in the upcoming sections of more services that I do offer, but in case you're interested in reading these for yourself, in case they are still available on the website, which I'm hope they will be for a long time, at least a few years, you can read that information here. But the second subset of grant writing that I offer is nonprofit consulting and organizational development. So again, strategic planning, income diversification. How can we not depend on writing grants? Even though I am a grant writer, I understand that there is a huge risk in just relying on grants. So I've been working very closely with organizations to make sure that they can also strengthen the muscles that go beyond the grant writing in itself. So how can they also fundraise? How can they develop a program or a gala or a smaller gala-like event so they can invite people and also earn funding through that so they can reinvest in the organization. So I work a lot with that, income diversification. Again, program development, fundraising strategy, capacity building, which is a huge one. Many of the organizations that I have described or talked about, I have really not described any, but many of the organizations that are starting out have been organizations that are pretty young. And many of the people in charge of the development, including executive directors, director of programs, coordinators within the organizations, have worked with me closely to make sure they have resources and skills so they can carry out the work that they do. So I work with them one-on-one, including coaching as well, so they can feel comfortable using this information. Not only using, but also acquiring the information that I've talked about already here. So with nonprofit consulting, there's also a new branch that I'm also exploring and I have been using lately, which is board and leadership support. Now, we know that the board is a huge part of any organization. I work with nonprofits to make sure that they can have a strong presence and leadership, specifically board member leadership, so they can fundraise for the organization. So I work with boards so they can also feel comfortable fundraising and reaching out to their own resources and networks to fundraise for these causes that they support. And again, organizational assessment. How do we know that we are successful? How do we know that we are creating? That is the second one. The third subdivision of grant writing that I have been able to create and use is philanthropy and community strategy. So again, within the larger nonprofit consulting grant writing umbrella, some programs that I have worked with that I can tell you, but I can't identify who I worked with. again, because of confidentiality. I work a lot with organizations who want to reach out to Latino, Latina, Latinx community members. So Latino, Latinx, Latina community engagement will be a focus that I have. One, that's the first one. The second one is language access. How do we make sure that people have opportunities to understand and communicate in the language of their choice? So that would be language access. One thing that you probably know about me is that my native language is Spanish. I learned Spanish first. I learned it before I learned English. And I know many times, or I know the many kinds of obstacles that many people still continue to live, because I myself lived them when I was growing up as a bicultural, binational, bilingual individual growing up in this country. So I work a lot with that. I also like to work on community-based participatory action research. I like to work with organizations who, again, value that community input and voice, so that organizations can, in fact, design, implement, execute programming that community members have a say in. I really like to work with organizations who make sure that they are creating programming that the community actually needs. I try to stay, and I do stay away from individuals or clients who don't take people's input and just design things because they think that's what community members need. And that to me is alarming. And I try to stay and work with organizations that, again, are really, really leading and guiding with community input. So that's another focus. Another focus within this community strategy will be cultural competency. Sometimes organizations are having trouble working with immigrant communities. So not that I represent all the immigrant communities that there are here in this country or in this world, but I do like to, again, provide my experience as a person who has lived many of these obstacles, and we can make sure that community members have the chance of, reducing these barriers so that people can feel more welcomed and they can feel that they can actually reach out. Another focus that I've been working on lately, and my grant writing general strategy, will be advocacy. How do we make sure that people have a say in, shaping decisions that impact their life? For example, how can we have someone learn about a cause that is impacting them and what resources that they have to advocate or speak for their students? One of the biggest things in programs that I have worked in the past is making sure that parents, specifically Spanish-speaking immigrant parents, know about the processes that they have to understand how the education system works in this country. And not only that, but so that they can have more of saying in their children's education. One, making sure that they have access to learning materials, that they are supported, and that they have, again, the opportunity to succeed academically. So civic engagement, advocacy in general, it's one of the biggest things that I also worked in the past few years as well. The other one would be, again, how do we fundraise and work with public sectors and nonprofit partnerships? And that's really a focus within that strategy. I mentioned one more that I want to deepen more in this last section of the recording or this episode, and that would be coaching and professional development. As I mentioned earlier, many of the organizations that I worked with in the past have been organizations that are starting out or organizations that are probably less than 5 years. So I work with them to, again, look at their grant writing strategy. How does that fit into their general fundraising strategic plan for the organization? So these are nested components into larger branches of the organization. So I work a lot with them. How can we ensure sustainability? For cultural organizations, how can we make sure that artists, cultural workers, or real organizations in general have the resources so that they can carry out the work that they have? Now, the one which I talked about earlier is income diversification. So we'll look at organizations' current income. How can they further expand that as well? And lately, I've been also exploring public speaking with individuals who are interested more about the public relationship of marketing and fundraising. So I work with them to give them a few tips of, how can they feel more comfortable speaking about their organizations instead of just, listing the programming. How can we talk about a mission, vision, value statement where if they were to introduce themselves in a funder conference, they can feel comfortable speaking in person to a funder and pique their interest and say, hey, hopefully we can reach out later and give funding to them. So that's something that I've been really working on. Not something that I really do on a day-to-day, but I've found out that on the coaching, organizations do need a little bit more of strengthening on this side as well. So I work a lot with career development and give people talks around working as a first-generation immigrant, Latino, Mexican-American person living here in the United States. Talk about how I've developed my career as a individual, how I have developed my understanding as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, and again, economic mobility. So I really, really wanted to share this with you today because, again, I never or rarely share this information with you all. Like I said, I cannot disclose clients' information because that is confidential. But I did want to give you more of an input about more of the things that I do offer and the consulting that I offer outside of the art and the programming that you see on my social media. So why can you consider working with me? I really combine many of these intersectional components that I've been mentioning earlier. That includes strategy, storytelling, community-centered thinking, and some of my strengths that I can talk more about in depth as well are, one, translating complex ideas into clear action steps as well. Many clients in the past have had trouble understanding, how do we cut through the noise? How do we think about being clear about what is it that we do? So again, translating complex ideas into action steps. Another reason to work with me would be connecting community needs to funding opportunities. So that is really why I'm here. I want to make sure that community members have the chance of succeeding and having opportunities for their lives as well. So I also work with developing compelling narratives. I work with facilitating meaningful conversations, again, from staff to working with board members, working with program directors, as well as people who have been coordinating. And again, bridging institutional perspectives, developing practical and sustainable solutions. I really value not only talking about the things that are, ailing us or hurting us, but also how do we make our lives better? Not just, focus on what's happening, but also how can we move away from the obstacles and systematic issues that are impacting us. And I do that through thinking. I do that through strategic thinking. I do that through community building. I do that as my practice as an artist, as a consultant, as a writer. I do it with clients, working with them closely. And again, I wanted to offer this because this information is here. It's on my website in case you want to listen or read, rather, to this information on your own. But this episode, this recording is available. And I would love to go more into detail into other kinds of consulting that I do offer. But I kind of touched a little bit on those. If you're interested, you can listen to or read my website for more consulting services that I offer. We talked about grant writing and fundraising, but the other remaining three are one, communication strategy, speaking engagements, art and culture consulting as well. So this is really the end of this episode, but I really have to close one by promoting and thanking every person who has reached out to me in the past. And when I say promoting, I want to say that I have been very grateful to make this podcast, this recording possible, because people like the people who are listening are purchasing a book that I wrote in 2025 called Clarita Migrates North. And Clarita Migrates North is a book about a little girl that was born in Mexico but moves to the United States or another country, a northern country. And it's about the trajectory of her and her family crossing the border and what it means to leave everything behind and start anew in a new country. And I want to say that when people buy my book, when people purchase my book called Clarita Migrates North, they are funding this free information that I'm sharing. So I am sponsoring this conversation. I really want to make this information accessible. I wanted to make it the episode information I'm speaking about right now. I want to make that information free so that, again, people can have resources and opportunities for them to live a happier and healthier life. So anytime that you buy a book from me, anytime that you share, anytime that you connect me to an organization that can read my book or can even license the illustrations that I created, you are making this possible. You are making that I can share this information to everyone who's listening. And my podcast has been happening for the past year or 2 years now. And again, this information is for free. People who are listening to it, that information is free. And the more you buy, the more I'm able to create these episodes. So again, you don't have to buy the book, but if you do buy it, you're going to allow me to continue. And even if you don't buy it, you can always share and refer me to, connect me to an organization who you think can be a good fit with the information that I have. So again, the book that I wrote is called Clarita Migrates North. You can find that on my website. You can go on to antonioalanisart.com/books, and you can find the book in Spanish and English, and you can find that through Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or also if you are in the local area in North Carolina, I also offer in-person events where people can come out and purchase the book personally and get it signed and even write a dedication as well. I've been doing that lately. And again, there are multiple ways of supporting me. By buying a print, I have a lot of prints as well. You can go on to my store. I have a lot of great prints that I've been promoting lately, including the ones that have been one of the best sellers, the Niño con Carrito, the little boy with a little car, and other prints like my Calavera print, my Emiliano Zapata, Tlaloc, the Sueña, the large cactus, and so forth. And I also have a few shirts that are available. So again, thank you so much to everyone who has been listening for the past hour or so, 45 minutes. It's been really a pleasure sharing this information with all of you. Let me know if something in here resonates, and you can always, let me know. And I can talk more about a specific aspect if you have more questions about that collectively. Again, my name is Antonio Alanis, and it's really a pleasure sharing the work that I do because I believe that all of us deserve a happier and healthier life. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day. Hasta luego.